We are live for our first coffee club of 2024. We've got Rebecca Davis, Eric Willicke, and myself, Mark Richards, on the line. We've moved from Saturdays to a blend of Tuesday and Wednesday. So, welcome to join us. And in traditional fashion, we'll kick off with highlights of your week. Who's got something to share?
Also have to share what your favorite coffee is.
Oh, then I'll go first.
Okay.
My current favorite coffee that I'm geeking out on is a roast Veracruz dark from a lovely little local coffee roaster here in La Paz, Gratitude Coffee. And I just bought another half kilo this morning, and I am excited to tear it open, pour it in the espresso machine tomorrow morning. This morning I got to drink it there. Highlights from the last week. One interesting one is I got to try the passed through an animal poo coffee from Indonesia over the holidays. Speaking on the coffee theme, it was very smooth and interesting, and it's not one I will normally get. And I could tell you much more about it if it was top of mind. That was just an interesting, these coffee beans have been consumed by an animal and extracted from their poop and then washed and served as roasted and served as coffee. And it does things to them, apparently. So that was a highlight, question mark. And the real highlights, and maybe I'll share some obnoxious sunset pictures later, was coming back to Baja from North Carolina and just getting 2 days of incredible views and oceanfront sunsets on the way back home as part of an intentional overnight stopover.
I don't really know how to beat poop coffee.
I may have, for the first time ever, stymied Rebecca.
I think you win this one round, but
the war shall continue.
My adventure was less poop filled. Last week I was sick a lot, so it just felt good to kind of start to recover and not feel so sick, and then to be able to kind of focus on just reset. It feels like there's a lot of balls up in the air right now and different things I could be focusing on. So I've spent the last kind of day or so making sure I am focused. And I got to do a fun train trip from Georgia to DC, where I'm at right now. So that was kind of an adventure. Not sure I'm going to sign up for doing it very often because it's a very long trip. But it was an adventure, so mostly that.
Train trips, poop coffee, sunsets.
Planes, poop, and sunsets. What you got?
I started taking sunset shots when I went to the beach for a paddle and just realised that Eric's Mexican sunsets are way more attractive than my Melbourne sunsets. So I stopped posting them because I had sunset envy.
He's just doing AI pictures every night. He's like, make a new beautiful sunset.
I've learned how to program the AI that controls the weather.
Mm-hmm.
Highlights of the week. I think my highlight of the week was porting Safe City across to Miro. It's been on my to-do list for a very long time. And I finally got it, 90% done, ready to record some facilitation guide videos for it. But actually in the process, realizing how many things had advanced in Miro's capabilities since I made the original virtual Safe City, and putting a lot of really nice tweaks on it while I did it. So.
Tons of stickers in it. That's the best part.
Insta memes just for Rebecca.
Rebecca's just going to chase the animated GIFs.
What about your favorite coffee?
My favorite coffee is called Jasper Blend Number 6.
Specific?
Well, there's a back before Melbourne became what it claims to be as the coffee capital of the world now. and we all got completely obsessed about knowing our baristas and all the rest of it. The first company that started to really import a lot of different specialist coffee beans to Melbourne was a company called Jasper. And their slogan was something like for caffeine addicts, or it definitely involved caffeine and addiction somewhere in the slogan. And they had all these individual beans that you'd never seen before anywhere else, and then they made some custom blends. And one of their custom blends was blend number 6. And I used to love drinking it back 30 years ago because I first found it. We had this little French bakery near home that made amazing croissants and sold this deep, dark coffee that was perfect to go with the croissant. And when I got my espresso machine a few years ago, I experimented with lots of different beans to go, what do I like best through it? And I discovered that blend number 6 is best through it. So I don't play around. I just have blend number 6 every time.
Wow. Those are dedicated.
Nice. That's where Veracruz Dark is for me at the moment.
I was a barista for a short period of my life. Yeah, random small fact. And yet still, my favorite coffee is probably hot chocolate and not coffee at all.
But is it Mexican hot chocolate? That's the question.
No, just, milk and Hershey's or something.
One of my
Nothing fancy.
highlights of the Mexican trip was learning about the Mexican hot chocolate process. We went to
Is it also pooped out of something?
It almost feels that way. So we went to this little place in Oaxaca City that the guy was like, let me teach you the authentic chocolate experience. And we started with these are the different types of cacao beans. And this is the difference between mass production and artisanal production in terms of the settings we grow them in. And these are the good cacao beans, and these are the ones that 95% of the world's chocolate's made from. And one of the differences that happens with the cacao bean is whether it's washed or fermented. Because the beans inside the pod sit in this pulp. And most commercial chocolate production just washes the pulp off. But artisanal tends to let the pulp ferment. And it produces some different influences. So we went through this whole journey of taste the different, like he had all these nibs from the different types of cacao bean, and then he had them with different percentages of sugar. And there's this kind of thought in my head that says, 20% sugar is bitter dark chocolate. But it turns out from different types of cacao beans, 20% sugar can actually be not at all bitter. If you go to the more traditional ones, which basically only Mexico and some parts of South America farm anymore. And then they took us through this journey of, roast it, peel it, grind it, introduce the sugar level of your desire along with the spices of your desire, grind it again, and then make a traditional hot chocolate at the end of it, and then bag it up and send us home with the hot chocolate. And
so you got professional Oompa Loompa training?
We got professional Oompa Loompa training, and it was an awful lot of fun. The only trouble we had was that the hot chocolate we liked had some chili in it. And so we put the chili in to make our own custom blend. And our palates were sitting in, we've been eating chili every day in Mexico mode, which was fine for my son and me. But he brought it home and made it for his friends, going, here's this really cool hot chocolate I made in Mexico. And it ranged from one sip to rush to the sink and spit it out because it was too much chili. So,
do you all not have spices in Australia?
Apparently not like that.
We can't get the variety of, the variety of chilies in Mexico is obscene. And most of those really good, flavorful chilies, to get them over here, they've been dried and they're very old, which gives a very different impact to what happens with the fresh ones that they get over there. So we were geeking out on the variety and freshness of the chilies quite a bit.
That is delightful. It was probably similar to my shock going to a U.S. grocery store last week and observing the avocados.
Like to see if they ran away.
I don't think they could. They're so hard and semi. They're dead. They're just poor dead little things.
Ah, what are you observing them for? No, I'm just curious. This is going to be a whole hour of just food, apparently.
Sadness. Just a deep sense of sadness for the poor avocados that had to be put in frozen trucks and shipped north.
Okay, we might want to shift to books.
Why don't we talk about agility a little bit? So it should come as no surprise to anybody who's been watching us and knows how much we love to read that we all read a lot on the holidays. So we thought we'd kick 2024 off with, what did you read on your holidays and what inspired you about it? Who wants to kick us away?
That was my vote. Or I can go. Mine will probably be shortest because I did a lot of family time during the holidays.
Why don't you go, Rebecca?
I did read a lot of non-work related books because I'm always reading a lot of non-related work-related books. So if anybody after this call wants any tips on like dragon and wizard and witch books, I got you covered. But from a work-related point, I reread Out of the Crisis. I finished rereading that. I did that kind of intentionally. I'm just finding, I think from reading one of the books that I think you guys have read recently too, the Deming Journey book that came out, just kind of recentered me and more and more discussions around how much just comes and roots from Deming and his brilliance. So I reread that and it helped me ground a bit. And then I read a book called Resonate on that. I ended up getting for the holidays because it was on my wish list for a while, which I'm really appreciating because it's kind of, to me, it's a book that you can just go to, and if you're going to do a presentation and you want to kind of play with a new way or a different way of crafting that talk or crafting that workshop or crafting the presentation they haven't used in a while, and finding it really useful to just go through and kind of pick out different thoughts in different ways, especially as I'm doing a lot of talks and a lot of crafting things right now. And you, Mark, made it so that I ended up ordering, as soon as you gave it the great okay that you did, More Than a Motorcycle, which I'm hoping that you'll talk about a bit too. But you were right. It was awesome. So
let's
probably my main.
let's talk about it now, right? More Than a Motorcycle. Like, I read a dozen odd books on my break, and by far the favorite was More Than a Motorcycle. It was, I don't know, I would say the last book I read that I enjoyed like that was American Icon, the Mullally story. And like, I read More Than a Motorcycle because Sengi referenced it in The Fifth Discipline, right? And I always loved, what is it, The Lean Machine?
Mm-hmm.
The whole Harley does lean in R&D story. I thought that was great. And obviously it influenced SAFe an awful lot in terms of the number of the principles that now pull diagrams out of the Lean Machine. And I thought it told a fascinating story about Harley until I read More Than a Motorcycle and went, the Lean Machine almost told the least important stuff about what was happening in Harley. It's co-written by the CEO and his personal coach, or the CEO through the 90s and 80s, Rich Teelink. And it's just the most beautiful story of deliberate, sustained focus on building a leadership culture. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, I liked all the stories within it, and like you said, I don't know. There's a few things I liked about how it was written. It was had like a weird mix of like humble confidence. Like, this is what we did. We didn't do anything that anybody else couldn't have done, but we did do it. And this is how we did it. And I just appreciate that. It also didn't shy away from, I think, something that to me is like a weird thing about newer leadership books where they all try to be like special. And I'm saying something special that nobody else has said before. And these guys didn't seem to try to do that. They just said, like, this is the stuff that worked. This is why we made these decisions along the way. This is what worked and didn't work. Which I really appreciate because it feels more authentic that the person that they were trying to really, tell something that is a gift rather than tell something because I really want to be seen as awesome and wonderful and you should think how wonderful I am.
It was also like they were very vulnerable in the way they wrote it too. They, boy, they were willing to share mistakes.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about what it feels like on the part, like to read somebody who's not trying to share something unique and special and different, like what some of the tonality differences or how you sense that? Asking as somebody who's writing.
Go ahead.
For
I'll
me,
try to.
the beginning of that feeling is though we didn't have the answers, but we cared deeply about the problems. Tone. And they were never trying to say, here's a grand series of moves. If you think about the typical leadership book is going to go, there's a certain set of ingredients and a playbook and a recipe you need to be an amazing leader. And, here's the conclusions we've drawn. And if you just follow this recipe, life will be great. These guys went, we cared deeply. There was a difference we wanted to see. And we didn't know the answers, but we were relentless in our pursuit of finding the next answer. And we had ups and downs, but we kept searching because we kept believing. And there was no part of the book where they come back and they go, here's the recipe. Because really, I think the recipe that they gave was it takes years of sustained, passionate commitment at the top to change the leadership culture.
Yeah, that was really well stated. I mean, I think the only thing I would even add to that, because you did such a good job, is, I mean, to add on to the recipe thing, it does feel sometimes like people are writing a book to write a book, not that they're writing a book to, like, gift or help other people out who might need to run into something. And I think being a leader and running an organization, especially one that's big, is actually like really hard. And it frustrates me when I read something and people are trying to make it sound easy or simple, or you do these 5 things and, like you said, everything's just awesome and go you. Um, it is hard. It should be hard. You have all this responsibility for other people, and um, I think that perseverance, like those perseverance stories and how you overcome and that you aren't going to get things right, are really critical to being authentic as a writer, but also to helping other people realize that if they want to sign up for something like that, like if they want to have belief, they can have belief, they should have belief, but they should also like work at it because it's real work.
I think there's an authenticity comes through as well in like it becomes very believable when the pitfalls and the traps and the challenges along the way are shared. There's no magic carpet ride promised. There's just hard work, where I think quite often a book will go, here's the magic carpet ride.
Step 1, wake up. Step 2, change everything about yourself. Step 3, everything will be great.
Could I have a little more detail on step 1? That one's hard. But going back to that feeling, do you get the similar feeling in American Icon?
Yes. But I would say, to be honest, I'd say, to be honest, American Icon was less vulnerable. I mean, there was a beautiful part of American Icon, which was, the brutal reality of their journey of balancing dealing with the unions versus dealing with the state of the economy and the government versus, the sheer amounts of money that were moving this way and that, while he was trying to completely reinvent Ford. And, the navigation of the tensions of these massive forces and some of the harsh realities of them was great in American Icon. But I don't know, More Than a Motorcycle felt more real to me. It certainly shared similar. You got a picture of the unions versus the economy versus the cash flow versus whatever else, but you also got a sense of the navigation of personal realities much more deeply than came through in American Icon.
Okay.
And I think it was something I was becoming more and more aware of as I read it. And boy, I just chewed it. I think it was 2 days. I couldn't put it down. But if I threaded across a lot of the books that I was reading, and kind of one of the things that was starting to stick out to me was it's easy to think there's a recipe at an organizational level, which is, pick some lean and agile buzzwords and, life will get better. But I felt like there's a thread that I'm seeing again and again and again, which is actually for an organization to really transform, it's about 3 to 5 years of a shift in leadership culture. And it doesn't really matter what buzzwords you put in at the operational level, because they'll come and go. You can have arts, you can have agile teams, you can have lean, you can have slowification and simplification. Pick your buzzword of choice. But really, if you want sustained, amazing change for the organization, what you need is sustained effort of a 3 to 5 year period of reinventing the way leadership works together. And, More Than a Motorcycle was a 10-year journey of sustained emphasis on that. I think American Icon told probably a 5-year story of it, but in less depth on the leadership culture. There was certainly that, the Thursday war rooms and the shared accountability aspect to it, but it was at less depth. But I mean, one of the other books I read was, I went into Chris Argyris land, and the book was Organizational Traps. And, you could basically summarize the book as him going, here's 30 books on how to transform an organization, and they're all going to fail because none of them address the topic of leadership facing into their behaviors from the past and how they contributed to the problems of the current, and the need for leadership to change if the current problems aren't going to reoccur in the future. So, boy, it was the thread came across in Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge as well.
So, because there's a theme across some of these books, the ones I've read. I'm trying to buy that book, but I realize I'm going to have to ship it to the States and wait till I get there to have it.
It isn't
easy. But around that time commitment, I'm thinking also like Delta and their 10-year focus on one metric around preventable maintenance-based delays. I forget the details on that one, but like these just longer term culture changing focus shifts. are coming through in story after story. And as a consulting stance, it's really hard to get engaged in that scale of change and conversation.
I mean, I look at it as a little bit about, I mean, the books I'm drawn to lately, it is focus. It is also like leadership, actually leading. I think there's like a weird teeter-totter I sometimes see where leaders try so hard to change in the act of like how they listen and how they let everybody else make decisions. I really like that this book and others are pretty good at saying like you're accountable for leading.
Yeah.
You need to be the decision maker. You need to be the one who says that we are persistent, that we will be persistent, and that we leaders need to be leaders together. And I mean, I think that's for whatever reason shied away from a lot. Or it's too hard or whatever. Um, and I like that this book didn't shy away from that. They also went through the trials of like, what does that look like? How do we still listen and lead and hold ourselves accountable and held ourselves accountable together? What worked and what isn't working? Um, from like your last comment, I'm not sure that that's always, um, and my like personal experience bias here, but I do think there's a part of this where teams, like leadership teams, have to look each other in the face and figure that out, not have somebody come in and like coach them into figuring that out. Um, and there can be like the kickoffs and like the continuous workshops where somebody else can like give that other viewpoint and help nudge. But in the end of the day, like that team has to be a team, just like any team has to be a team. And they've got to own up to persevering to become that.
Having said which, I was very jealous of his consultant who got to do that whole journey with him. And it was Lee, what was it? Lee Osley.
I mean, that person like stuck with them.
Yeah.
I do think I don't think that's uncommon. I don't think about a person like that in the same way I think about most consultant companies or consultants. I do think every senior leader needs, and almost all good ones I've run into have a personal coach. I think everybody should have a personal coach in some way, shape, or form. I know I have one. And I think that's a little different to me than what I think about as most consultancies.
Yeah, and I think I agree with your difference between person who is a consultant in an executive coaching role or something and a consultancy.
Yeah.
There's certainly leaders I've been working with and around for 10 years now across a variety of roles. I call them friends.
Yeah. And that was like, I looked at the relationship between the two of them and I went, that's the kind of relationship I like to have with the leaders that I coach. So I really empathized and I just went, how cool that, like, as the coach or consultant, like he got to be on that whole journey. He got to see through a change of that magnitude. And you could feel the relationship between them in the interactions they had along the way. And they had a lot of kind of personal outtake moments. They'd be telling part of the story, and then one or the other of them would chip in with a paragraph of viewpoint on it. And you could feel their coaching relationship as it came through in the viewpoints. So I geeked out a bit as a coach. Maybe I geeked out a lot.
Well, I will set the expectation that I will get very excited about this book the first week of June.
Yeah.
It's on my calendar to order 3 days before I land in Nashville.
I could bring you the copy to Berlin, maybe.
Could do that.
Okay.
I could read it. I might even return it by the end of the week.
Yeah. Sharing is caring, after all.
Carrying is caring.
Mm-hmm.
That
was one of the books we all read. Well, two
of us. Why don't we jump from there to one that I think we all read, which was Deming's Journey to Profound Knowledge. I think you might have read it a little bit before the holidays, both of you. I know I read it because you guys were talking about it.
Yeah.
Looks like
I
we
read it.
finished it on November 7th.
Yeah. I got it at the DevOps conference where it was released, and then read it pretty much right then after having a conversation with the author that was just really, really fun.
Yeah.
I think I guess that's another one where part of the reason I like it so much is how giving the author was.
Yeah.
And, like, unselfish. I mean, totally different type of book, right? He's writing about somebody else's life, but just sitting with him, at the conference and having him he's just like, "I don't know, you guys just wanna chat? Like, pick a chapter and I'll tell you the deeper story behind it." And it was like it reminded me a lot about around when you sit down with, like, your grandparents or a great uncle and you finally have that moment as an adult where they're telling you everything about their life, and you just want it to never end because everything is so fascinating and so interesting. I felt like that about how he wrote about Deming and then also about the author himself. Like, I just wanted to sit there and just let him tell me stories and eat popcorn and ask him questions the whole time.
That's awesome.
I think the funny thing about the book, like I really enjoyed it. Boy, I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I didn't go wild with my highlighter in it. It was like it was just a fascinating journey to read, but it didn't kind of reach the end, and I went, "Oh, I have to highlight all kinds of things to refer back to." It was just fascinating insights into
It's just fun.
yeah, and really painted a picture of Deming the man instead of Deming the icon. Like the realization of just how down to earth he was great.
I find that is consistent with my memory of very experienced engineers from that era. Like the two or three that I grew up around, and like my memory of them as older individuals that lived through the war that were just around and deeply experienced, they all kind of have that feel or vibe to me. Like down to earth, practical, not esoteric, but just here's how we solved problems. This
Yeah.
was a problem, we had to solve it.
Right.
Kind of that quiet willpower and determination element.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, for me, a lot of that comes through in like Henry Petroski's writing as well. And like he's a little more failure centric in some of those things, but like just really interesting listening to that era of engineering for me. Some of the stories out of like early Bell Labs were in that category. Really love that's like my definition of the engineer I want to be in some ways.
You wanna grow up and work for Bell Labs?
If I could work for Bell Labs in the, I don't know, 30s, sure,
Yeah.
maybe. I mean, maybe in the next 30s, perhaps at this point, but but yeah, the great old engineering, Xerox Park, like some of those places just sounded like phenomenal places to be. And I
Yeah.
got a feel of it in college, like being surrounded by. I went to engineering school. I identify still as an engineer, even though that hasn't been my career since the second year out of school. But I like that aura of just being surrounded by really smart people solving important problems is delightful. And in engineering, you actually get to see your solutions and they work. You don't have to hope for them and wait 5 years most of the time, unless it's maybe large scale civil engineering.
Yeah, there's definitely a very rapid feedback cycle with engineering.
Um, I was amused thinking, oh, how much did I go crazy with my highlighter? And I'm like, you're right, I didn't much. I only had 50 highlights.
Did you have 50 highlights in that? Maybe I just got too into the reading the story. I reckon I probably had less than 10 highlights for the whole book.
A lot of it
Credit.
is I highlight things that are well said in case I want to go pull quotes and things like that, not just things that were deeply impactful.
Do you both, like, always read with a highlighter? I just wanna read the book.
That's why I hate reading physical books, because always highlighter. Like the
Yeah.
highlighter's the journey of my reading. Um, the highlighter when I read like non-workbooks, the highlight is an indicator of which part of the book I fell asleep in, because I usually, when I fall asleep, wind up with
Those-
my finger resting on the Kindle and then
Wake
Why
up
did
with
I highlight
highlighter.
2.5 words here?
random highlighting pages. But it's why I fell in love with the Kindle when I started using it 20 odd years ago. Was that ability to just go highlight, highlight, highlight.
Like, I'm just looking at my list. It's like this one. Imagine logging into Amazon. 80% of every listing had those dreaded red words, out of stock. Now imagine an entire country like that. Also, you're starving. Like, okay, that's that's an interesting point of view of what it feels like to be a manufacturing expert in Japan at that time frame, or a manufacturing
Yeah.
owner.
It was interesting. I thought the picture of Ono that it drew and the personal abrasiveness that he exhibited, and the fact that his impact on Toyota was always limited to what he had seniority over, as opposed to him influencing to the side. It perhaps, because I always think of Ono as this, Zen guy, right? And the level of the portrait that it painted, in terms of that it wasn't just that he was thinking radically, he was very aggressive in the way he communicated his radical thinking. Was quite unexpected to me. It was a new view.
I just like the openness, like I don't know, I don't know if it's generational or not, but that just like clear bluntness. I really appreciate, like, this is how I see it. These are the facts. I think sometimes today that's seen as non-empathetic, where it's actually just incredibly clear. Um, so yeah, I like that a lot.
Fair enough.
One of the
But
reasons I love Orid retrospective so much.
love which
So
retrospective,
then
sorry?
Orid, ORID. Observations, reactions, interpretations, decisions.
Oh, God.
Mm.
That is, yeah, a reminder of things that I've forgotten. I remember when I discovered that and read the book, but played the Orid game. I think Jean Tobacco put me onto it.
Jean introduced me to it. I didn't know it was. I didn't remember it was in her book.
It wasn't in her book. There was a book. Might have been The Art of Focused Conversation. Don't quote me on that, because, of course, you had to remind me on Orid, but I think that might have been the book. Every time Jane did a talk at a conference, she would drop 5 or 6 books, and I would go and buy the 5 or 6 books and read them. And yeah, one of them had that, and I used it very mindfully for a while, and then I obviously completely forgot about it.
Remains one of my go-tos and default ways of looking at things when I find myself getting involved too much. It's like, okay, step back. What's actually observable here?
Well, it's like if you go back a little bit further in time, for me it resembles a little bit the Virginia Satir temperature check. Have you ever been through one of those?
I have. That's let's just swap positions now. That's one where I have to reload it in my brain.
So that the Satir temperature check was more recent for me than the Orid. I got introduced to it when I did problem solving leadership, and Esther Darby facilitated it, and it was quite a phenomenal format for a check-in. I love the segment which is complaints with recommendations. In terms
Like a
of
compliment sandwich.
no, it's not framed that. So Satir was a family therapist, and her gig was teaching families to communicate. And Weinberg studied with her and then borrowed all kinds of her techniques into his stuff. And obviously Esther, not sure that Esther studied with her, but I know she worked very closely with Jerry and was well and truly familiar with her work. And so all of her stuff was, how do you start to communicate truthfully so that you can navigate the uncomfortable topics that if you don't learn to navigate, you'll never fix anything in your relationship. And the temperature check she introduced as a habit a good family should build as a weekly check-in. And part of that weekly check-in was, complaints with recommendations. The permission was share a complaint, but the framing was share it with a recommendation on what could be different. So it was less a poop sandwich and more of a, I'm going to share, but in a way that lets you know something you could do to change the thing that I'm sharing about. And I've run it as a retro format a few times, and it's a good format. It's a really good format.
That's, for some reason, my head just said less poop sandwich and more poop coffee.
Well, I had to go to the poop coffee reference, right? Coming up a level. Eric, what was your favorite?
Favorite? So I'm gonna have to split on this one. My favorite was reading One Mission, which I just enjoyed reading through the next level of depth behind Team of Teams, and I hadn't read it before. And there's just something about reading how leadership and creating collaboration in a wartime environment works in the military that just reminds me how much easier it ought to be when you're not in that condition. And yet for some reason it seems harder, and like people give the whole like, well, in the real world, I'm like, it doesn't get much more real than people shooting at you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But for impact, I'm going to have to go with David Brooks' Second Mountain. It was just a phenomenal look, and we've talked about it on the previous episodes, just the kind of reshaping and the moving into the second phase of career and thinking about what impact and legacy is going to be and how I want to connect and build into communities and the work I want to do and the impact that has in the next half of my life. And it was just a really enjoyable perspective on the transformations that people go through at some midpoint and the lens that they tend to choose to take when they're done with the first grind and they're ready to start looking at what the next phase looks like. I happened to read it throughout my retreat. I had meant to skim a whole bunch of books, but that's when I ended up reading a bunch and then reflecting a bunch and doing active reflection during my retreat, back and forth. So it, I didn't get as much volume done as I had whimsically thought I might, but I got a lot of depth out of this one.
I guess the deep thinking triggers. I mean, that for me, where I just fall in love with the book is where it sends me down a lot of deep reflection paths. I'm about halfway through Second Mountain because you loved it so much. I think I'm still trying to get to the bit that's going to get me freshly enthused. Because I read it and I go, my first mountain was in the 90s. and my valley was the noughties. And it's felt like ever since I have been on the enterprise agility journey, that was my second mountain, using his metaphors. So a lot of it was like, yeah, I remember that lesson. I remember that lesson. I remember that lesson. As opposed to there's a complete new inspiration. But I'm figuring I'll get to some part of the book where there's a complete new inspiration.
Maybe you need to write a third mountain book if you don't.
Well, there's always and I've never managed to figure out how to tell the story as well as so many people do. I think the best time I heard this story told was somebody talking about auto navigation software and different techniques for it. But this notion that when you're climbing a mountain, you can very rarely see the peak. You can see the next peak. and you hit the next peak and there'll be a valley the other side of it, and then there'll be a next incline. And so there's never a kind of straight path up a mountain. The path up a mountain has many ups and downs as you navigate your way towards the top. And some of the challenges that causes to various approaches to guessing navigation techniques based on highest observable point. The fact that sometimes that can take you through a longer path than some other guessing techniques. So, I don't know about third mountain. I know second mountain that has many peaks and valleys along the way to the top.
Yeah, just for context, I had 165 highlights in that one.
You're reminding me, I did read an essay over break that's called Never Do That to a Book.
Okay.
And it goes through, it's a really, really well written, just really fun essay. And the author talks about the difference between being a courtly lover of books versus a carnal lover of books, and how much you can love a book to death by just doing all sorts of stuff to it all the time, versus courtly lovers are like, they treat it as the book itself is like the possession that you can't touch, like it's the thing that you need to make sure to be so careful about. And the difference in types of book readers and what they do to those books and how they think about the other type of book reader.
Was there a value judgment in there, or was it nicely balanced?
No, it was just a really nice, well, I mean, her whole family are carnal book lovers, and so it's got some really nice personal, like, this is what happens to some of the books in our family. And then how courtly book lovers look at that. But she's got like a just because I have it on my phone, she's got like a, even though I own a plastic cookbook holder, I never use it. It's a pleasure 30 years from now to open The Joy of Cooking to page 581 and behold part of the actual egg yolk that my daughter glopped into her very first patch of blueberry muffins. So she just got all these really fun stories about both times.
I love that example because I have so many cookbooks that the recipes I still need to try are the clean pages.
Yeah. It's like, I don't understand what courtly lovers use for shims, doorstops, gluing weights, or rug flatteners. What do they do?
I'm most definitely a carnal book lover. And like Eric, all my recipe books, if you want to know my favorite recipes, you just flip through the book. Because the pages that I have cooked again and again are very evident. But my mother-in-law was a librarian. And
courtly.
Very courtly. And I learnt very on not to borrow books from my mother-in-law or brother-in-law, because I would read a book and their job was to make sure it was evident that nobody had ever read the book.
It is really different. I mean, I think I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I mean, I like using bookmarks. I don't mind putting something flat. There's some books I want to actually keep for the sake of keeping them, but not very many. But like, she had one example. I guess her dad's like a professor or something, and he reads so much that if he needs to go on a plane in order to like lighten his load on the plane, he'll just rip off the part of the books he's read already and throw it in the trash and just take the part that he still has to go. I was like, beautiful. I don't know if I can do that.
It's delightful, and I don't think I could do that.
I couldn't do that. Like, I'm bad, but I'm not that bad.
Can you imagine sitting next to somebody in a plane and they're reading a book, and every time they turn the page, they just rip it and put it in a pile beside them? I think I would die.
I know. It is interesting. Like, which thing is really the sanctuary? Is it the holder or the content?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of beautiful books that you want to treat in a courtly way, tell me a bit more about Resonate, Rebecca, and I'll give you the prelude to this, which was you started talking about it, I don't know, a week and a half ago, I guess. You held it up and went, I'm loving this. And I went, I've never read any of Nancy Duarte stuff. And it became obvious that that was a very bad thing to not have read. So I went on Amazon and I ordered the trio. And of course, I went, it looks like that needs to be a physical book, not a Kindle book. So I ordered the trio as physical books, but I haven't received Resonate yet. I've received the other two, but I read Ology and loved it. And Eric was laughing at me the other day with a comment about the fact that when he first read it, it took him about a year to come out of the geek zone on it. And he was going to enjoy watching me try and find my way back out of the geek zone. But I'm curious on, I guess, the core messaging in Resonate. Like, what's the stuff that's really hitting you out of Resonate?
Yeah, I mean, what I like about it is, and I mean, Eric has also read this. This is the first of hers that I've personally read, and I'm excited that there are more of them. I had it on my wish list, I think for a while now, because I was working with a public speaking coach for a while, and just on a list of other books that she had suggested. And what I like so much is it's like a reference book for me almost. It's not like there's one thing that's like the whole overall arch. For me, I find it's really fun to work through, what are the different ways that I could create a presentation or bring some sort of a topic home. And this book is really good at helping me with that so far. So over the last week, I've had, I don't know, three somewhat major talks. And I've taken something out of the book different each time to be my starting point. So I think, it's everything from, hero's journey, which I think a lot of people know about, has a technique, but it goes deeper into, what are the different facets of that? How does hero's journey connect to like a different way of doing something similar to create your story arch? But here's the differences between that and this way and what you might get out of that. I also really like that it talks about what you're trying to, like, what are you trying to actually achieve by talking? Is it to talk, or is it to give a gift, or is it to influence a change, or is it just to plant a new seed? And all of those different reasons will have different potential methods that will really help you. So it also talks about like change mindset. Like if you are in fact trying to get somebody or some group of people to do something different than they would have if they hadn't otherwise listened to you, that might not be a one presentation thing. That might be something that, you're doing different presentations different times, and then at some point something will happen, which brings also to some videos I've been watching just lately about like the science in people's brains around change and around why you change. You definitely don't change because like you and I are having a conversation today and you're going to say something so pivotal that it's going to change me. There's all these like synapses in my head that just, they've all got to connect so that my brain itself is like, yes, this is the new thing. So yeah, I just like all the different examples. I like the different, I like the way it's laid out. It's very visual. And so you like have a page of text and then a very big graphical example that has a lot of things to think through. So I think it's going to be a book that I use going forward as a reference and just keep trying things with other people too. What did you get from it, Eric?
I was doing a bit of archaeology on this, which is like slideology, but different. I looked in my order history. I bought both books, Resonate and Slideology, on February 8th of 2011, which was interestingly, and I had to do this comparison, 4 months before I took Decker training.
Oh, wow.
As a related concept. And then I didn't get Data Story until 2021, but I've bought 2 copies of that because I gave one to the chief data officer of one of my clients. What I got from it was a completely shifted mindset of why I was standing there on stage. Not to put too fine of a point on it. And it was probably between those two events, the books and the Decker Grid, it was the beginning of my reorientation to customer centricity as a speaker. And I know that's like a big statement, but it was like that. Those books were a turning point of me, of like really challenging the why and the how of putting content together. And it was always like, oh, I'm speaking to this topic and people need to know this topic, but it was like that abstract of customer rather than rotating to who's the audience and why the heck am I wasting their time? And what do I change so that I'm not wasting their time? So it was kind of that level, but then again, and that's a 13-year ago version of Eric that was going through that journey as very early. I mean, it was not too long after my transition from uh, being a architect and practicing developer architect into being a full-time coach. Like maybe a month after I started at my first full-time coaching gig. So there was a life change and a tone change there as well.
Yeah, I mean, what I've run into since speaking became part of my job and not just something that happens because I'm scared about it and it has to happen, is a lot of people use Decker, and I've been using it a good bit. Our mutual friend loves it, and so every time I work with her, she wants to use it. It's
So glad I
not
introduced it
speaking.
to her.
Yeah, it's not speaking to me. Like I don't find that it's producing a result for me that is better than not using it. So I have been in search of like other techniques and other styles. Um, and I do like I like anything that's going to help me have a different way of looking at how I'm going to get information across. Um, because I think slightly different from you, maybe. I don't feel very comfortable doing talks all the time. So I like in order to feel comfortable, I always think like I'm about to give a gift, or I'm hoping like the thing I'm creating is to help somebody else, and that helps me feel more confident that people aren't there to judge me, they're there to gain something for themselves. Um, and I really like that this book gives all sorts of different ways that you could give that gift, and how you could think about, what are the ways to bring things home? Because I tend to go off in story world and everything's connecting in my head. That doesn't mean that the words coming out of my mouth are clear enough or concise enough to make the other people get it.
Yeah, you just put a little bit of a pin in one of my struggles with Decker actually. Is that it's kind of the presumed I'm pushing a point that is embedded through a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I mentally at one point had to make a little bit of a leap that what I'm really doing is trying to close a gap. And that's the gift I'm offering. They are somewhere. I believe they would be better off if they were here. And can I say the things to close that gap? Kind of a current future reality tension, all of fifth discipline.
Yeah. I like some of the examples too are really clear on like you don't actually have to be on there to have the audience do something different. It could just be you're up there sharing a different way for people to start to think, and then eventually maybe that might end up with something different. But what are the just the different viewpoints that you might be bringing? I do think we end up with all those different types of talks of, here's new information. This is what the new information is. This is why you might care about the new information, and how it might help, to all the way to like, hey, there's this huge like art of the possible world out there. Here's a bunch of like ways that maybe by listening you might start to think about all those possibilities, and not necessarily caring if they end up going down one route or another.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious where Decker's. I'm looking at their courseware right now. I'm curious where they've evolved to. 'Cause they've got more around the art of storytelling and meaningful conversations, but it used to be very much about a sales-led effort. Like it was sales training.
Feels like that when I do it, which just isn't. It's just not me.
I
Mark?
I I I hate selling.
You hate what?
I hate selling. I hate anything that
Yeah.
smells of salesy. And I remember reading To Sell Is Human, the Dan Pink book, to try and help me get through some of my mental blocks on it years ago. But I've been on an interesting mental journey while you guys have been chatting about this, because it started with a flashback to the first ever conference talk I gave, which was 33 years ago now. And told you it was flashback.
When you were like 5, right?
Yeah, when I was 5. Let's go with that.
Mhm.
It was on arrays, and the new version of the language that I was programming in had just introduced very complex nested / ragged arrays that you could do all kinds of tricks with. And I went, and so I was doing a conference talk on that. And it was before PowerPoint and projectors were a thing. It was the old overhead projectors. So you printed transparencies as slides and you slid them on and off the projector. And I sat and I built 77 A4 sheets of examples of different array structures to run through in a 45-minute conference talk. And I didn't get stabbed, and I should have been.
Did you get through them all?
I got through them all. I was
But
just in love with everything you could do with an array, right?
Yeah, but what's cool with that era is you could actually just stack like 7 at a time and put them all up and multitask that way, and just have all your slides stacked on top of each other. Like just do 5 at a time.
Look,
It'll be fun.
it's to be sort of less going back into the very dim and distant path. I found slidology, like, it contributed to perhaps a little bit of mental rewiring that I've been having to do lately. And, Weinberg used to love to talk about discovering the unwritten rules that you have that program you. Because as you discover the unwritten rules that program you, you have the opportunity to change your programming. And I have been a hater of PowerPoint all my life. And it began, so I was doing a lot of talking at tech conferences back in the 90s, late 90s. And I always used to snigger at the guys who would use PowerPoint to talk at a tech conference because I believed in live coding. And all of my conference talks were live coding. And maybe I'd have 2 slides for a talk. But I believed in making it real as opposed to making it PowerPoint. And
so you are an interpretive dance presenter? Because I'd like to see that.
not as much as my wife would like to see it. No, I love being in the moment with a story.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always struggled with transitioning into the kind of stage story land. I love to be in the moment. And I find that moment where I just go to a whiteboard, go to a flip chart, and I'm sharing something, I am often far more articulate and impactful than when I stand on stage at a conference with something I've sweated over for weeks. Right.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to find a way to bring the me that can happen in the moment into a conference stage setting, right? It's been one of the challenges of my life. And I think along with that is because, of course, when you're in a conference stage setting, usually there's a PowerPoint behind you. And one of my personal unwritten rules is that I am not a graphical person. And I'm also a perfectionist. So if I'm going to do something, I want to do it really well. or not at all. And I think my view on PowerPoint has been I don't like PowerPoint. I'm not a graphical person. Therefore, I'm going to grind my way through it as opposed to attempting to master it. And slideology and various, a whole bunch of stuff I've been researching over the last 6 months as we've gone down this streaming journey has had me going and learning there are guidelines, rules, and recipes that can transcend your lack of natural ability. And when you can master, like let's say the rule of thirds, when you can start to master some of those things, that can help you to get through your mental blocks about your ability to be effective in that medium. And so I had a whole bunch of that stuff happening, including generating images of clown babies for Rebecca. And slideology just packaged a whole bunch of it together for me. Because I think it sounds like Resonate is the art of crafting a story. Slideology is the art of communicating that story on slides. And I got to the end of it and I went, that so resonates with me in terms of what I like and don't like when I see somebody else present. And I wish I'd read it a long time ago, but it also gives me some systems to apply. And oh my goodness, I've got to go and rebuild every slide I built last year. And well, I already started, right? So I've got my product owner training I built last year, where the clown baby lives, and I'm currently doing the second delivery of that, but cohort style. So 1 session a week with a group of product owners, and so every week it's like I get to do second iteration, but now I'm starting to iterate between weeks as well. So I took all the content for this week's session that I did yesterday, and my slideology inspiration, and recut it over the last few days. And I actually like the slides now. I felt really good using them, and they look very, very different to the slides I've been building for a long time. So it's been an interesting journey.
Did anybody comment?
Yes, probably less on that than on the fact that the co-activation logo had disappeared from the slides and the shaping agility logo had appeared, which was prompting a great deal of curiosity.
That sounds curious.
You guys are funny.
So what, just glancing at the facilitation timeline for this session, is it time to start migrating into final thoughts?
Yeah, gee, I just looked at my watch when you said that and went, we have got ourselves a little bit lost. We were going to talk about other things today, but it feels too late in the day to open and
We
do
didn't
other things.
get lost. We found exactly where we needed to be.
Yeah, exactly. A meander.
Books and talk.
I like the set-based design. We have. It's not an agenda. It's a list of options to explore.
I had a theory when we talked about it that as soon as we started talking about these books, we would get lost on lots of different sidetracks and never make it past what we read on our holidays. But it was good to have backup options.
But it gave us something nice to come back to.
Yeah,
like a civet drinking a cup of its own coffee. I generated some AI art just for you, Rebecca. It's on the board.
So excited. Yeah, I mean, I just appreciate this feels like a really good reset for the year and Wednesdaying, which is now my new word. Oh, good. You guys are always fun to chat with. I do want to start to read more of the things that you guys have listed. So I think it'd be fun to kind of share the full list if possible and meander our way through.
Yeah, I put my most recently reading list on the board if you want to take a look.
Yeah. I'm also really interested in the future talking with you guys more about your presentation styles. I really, as much as I dislike the evil clown baby, I also really like the evil clown baby that you made, Mark. So it'd be cool to just chat through like your process of clown babying.
Yeah. It's actually, and our planned backup topic, which I suspect might become next week's topic, was to talk about our approach to building our talks for Berlin.
Yes. Perfect
And
timing.
Eric and I did a kind of first session of just putting our two talks side by side last week.
That's great. That's just like Eric and I's talks are side by side in the schedule.
And
Oh, are they?
Just went live.
there you go.
We have a chance to adjust these things, right? Are they on day 1 or day 2 out of curiosity?
Day 1.
Oh, good. Because I have to rush out on day 2.
But yes, I would love to walk through that.
Well, as we looked side by side, we went, gee, we really need Rebecca's as well. Because what became really interesting was you could see some quite easy synergies between where Eric's going and where I'm going. And I bought him some space because, of course, Eric's panic is how does he tell the whole story he wants to tell in the time box he's got. And I bought him some space. I think I bought him about 5 minutes.
Got me about one of the things I said to Mark as we were doing this is, I think I'm done with my 60-minute version of the talk. Now I just got to figure out how the heck to do my 30-minute.
Yeah, it was always fun to be a program chair or whatever for you, Eric, and get your initial 130 slide deck. Like, I don't even know how to give feedback on this.
Would you prefer I give feedback on evens, odds, or just the first half? Your choice.
Right.
Well,
I would love to take your talk and put it above ours because I think it is going to provide a nice envelope. I'm remembering what you submitted.
It would have been really nice to actually be able to sequence them as an arc.
And it may not be too late. Pick and choose. Yeah, but lovely. Definitely liked the coffee conversation, so I'll have to.
That was fun.
Try that.
I've just got to adjust to my Saturday session being a Wednesday morning over a coffee instead of a Saturday night over a whiskey.
There's no reason you can't do both, really. I mean, you're an adult. Do what you want.
As I recently told my daughter, it's like being an adult means you get to do whatever you want, and sometimes that includes going to bed at 9 p.m.
Sometimes.
9 p.m. I'm just trying to...
That's when I usually wake up.
No, actually, I was quite regularly going to bed like that while I was on my holiday. Mexico was pretty much always between 9 and 10.
Yeah, if you're in the right places in Mexico, the sun goes down and things get very quiet.
Yeah.
You're in the other places in Mexico, the sun goes down and the tubas come out. You get to choose.
This is odd. You got any sunsets you want to bring us home with?
Sure. It's just above the board.
He's been dropping them all over the board. Let me let me zoom in. I'm going to take us to a sunset from Eric as our closing visual, and say,
there you go.
If you've been watching, if you watch this after, and by the way, I figured out what went on. We are now simul streaming to YouTube, except I accidentally had the YouTube stream set to private. So I turned it public about halfway through. I'm not sure whether we acquired any watches. Welcome to 2024 and our new time, but probably a similar style to what we figured out we enjoyed on Saturday nights last year, which is start with a few places we might go and then see where we wind up. Have a great Tuesday evening in the US or Wednesday day in Australia.